Hi, my name is Juliette, and I am the creator and host of Connecting the Dots podcast. I love ideas and problem solving, and my career in communications has led me down a path of curiosity. Why we do what we do, how we tell better stories, and how African scientists solve everyday problems. Join me on this enlightening and entertaining exploration of African science like you've never experienced before. Get ready to laugh, learn, and be inspired. And today, I am joined by Dr. Charity Wayua, who is the director of IBM Research Africa. She has received several awards and recognition, including Kenya's top 40 women under 40, a head of state commendation from the former Kenyan president, His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, and IBM's Outstanding Technical Achievement Award, among others. She led the public sector team to develop commercially viable technologies that transform how governments function and provide services to their citizens. Dr. Wayua has a PhD and bachelor's in chemistry from Purdue University and Xavier University in America. She's passionate about leveraging science and technology to address Africa's development challenges and is a strong advocate for bringing science, innovation, and data at the intersection of policy, development, and business. Karibu sana, Dr. Wayua.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here today.
We want to talk to you about AI. AI is a trending topic nowadays, and what a moment and how exciting to have a woman talk to AI. But before we do that, tell us a little bit about yourself, your schooling, and how you ended up in science.
Very cool. So I grew up here in Kenya, in several small towns, in Embu, in Kitui. And perhaps one of the enduring memories of my childhood is my curiosity and just love for learning the why and what and how of things. So I have really fond memories of growing up in Embu, spending time in the public library, and my mom trusted me enough to let me sort of go there every Saturday.
Yeah.
And I just sort of dived into books, read a lot, was interested. And you can imagine when we had to move from Embu to Kitui, it was a proper discussion about, is there a library in Kitui? That's the only condition I have for moving there. So really happy childhood. I finished my primary school and joined Alliance Girls. Had a fantastic time there. I think that's where I kind of discovered my love for chemistry and science in general. When I think about Alliance, more than the education part, I think I had more fun doing extracurricular activities. And I think it really helped me to become all-rounded. There was just so much opportunity for things to do, teaching Sunday school at Dagoretti Children's Center, visiting Togoto Home for the Aged to just sing and sort of hang out with the gentlemen and women who are there. Just a bunch of extracurricular activities, of course, going to movies with the boys. So really helped me to be well-rounded and also learn my joy and excitement about chemistry. I had a really good teacher as well, Ms. Waweri. So that's how I got into science, and that's eventually how I got into undergrad in the US through a scholarship program.
I'm not surprised. For somebody who used to go to the library every Saturday, I'm not surprised you got a scholarship.
Yeah, so Zawadi Africa Education Fund was just beginning at that time, and their focus was on developing the next generation of African women leaders. And I was part of that first cohort, and that's how I found myself in the US.
So moving to the US, from Kenya to US, studying chemistry, ending up in cancer research. Tell us about how you went from cancer research to working with technologies that revolutionize public service delivery.
Yeah. So I think the way I have come to understand my love for science is one in the scientific method and the fact that it's very
methodological,
very good to sort of move from a problem to some level of principled and organized way of solving a problem. So for me, I think that's the underlying part that I really love. And so in my decision to take cancer research as my PhD thesis, it was in that. I found an interesting problem, and I found a really cool way of using science to address that through the advisor that I had through grad school. So by the time I was finishing my PhD, I I was trying to figure out what to do next. And the one thing that was very clear for me was that I needed and I wanted to be back in the continent addressing challenges and problems here. So at that point in my thinking, pharmaceutical or drug discovery was not something I could have that ability to do, particularly in the cancer space. I know there's a lot happening in the infectious diseases space.
Right.
So I decided to just move back and say, I want to find areas that I'll be able to utilize my scientific background to solve problems. And I guess through God's providence, IBM Research was actually just setting up shop at exactly the same time. And the mission for the lab at that time was leveraging science and technology to address Africa's grand challenges. So it really fit well with my mission, and that's how I joined. And of course, when you join in, there's a fair amount that you have to learn on the side of technology that I didn't bring in as my background. But also we're in a world where the half-life of skills is about 5 to 6 years.
Oh my gosh, yeah,
so
really short.
Literally having to learn new skills, and I've had a fantastic time doing that at IBM. On the public sector transformation work, one of the first projects I was privileged to lead at IBM was in collaboration with the Kenyan government. And at that point, the president was very interested in improving our ease of doing business. In the country, and there was this ranking that the World Bank announced every year, and it's essentially a measure of the complexity with which people have to interact with government. So think about the number of processes or steps you have to take to access a government service, how long it takes, things like that. The underlying policy space that, because government processes are really defined first in policy. So the cool work we were doing was, one, understanding those processes and really understanding where the bottlenecks are, right? And some bottlenecks are sometimes just in the process, sometimes it's in the law. And so we worked with a bunch of people in different government agencies to be able to re-engineer the business processes, which is something that we do very well in tech, but also go back into the law and say, this law is from 1960 and was applicable then. Now we have technology that can address what they were trying to address with that law. And then we transform all of that and put it together into an actual digital tool or transformation that people can access services through digital.
Very impressive. So with more than a decade at the world's largest industrial research organization headquartered in New York, the International Business Machines Corporation, popularly called IBM, I think they've rebranded recently. What does your work entail, and what is it that excites you about the work that you do there as a director?
So when you're in a research organization that's part of a big enterprise, your biggest mission is actually thinking about how you create the innovations that are going to power the products of the organization. So if I were to really summarize the mission for IBM Research and IBM Research Africa, is, one, to be the organic growth engine for the organization. And what that means is that we develop new products, improve the products that IBM puts out in the market. And as you said, today our focus is on artificial intelligence, of course, generative AI, and I'm sure we'll talk about that.
Yes.
And then also on cloud. And these are really some of the fundamental technologies that are driving the enterprise. So for us, one is, how do we create products that will drive IBM's business? But because we know products or capabilities in technology are really driven by advances in technological capabilities, then our second mission is ensuring that we're at the forefront of creating science that will drive the innovations that we make in technology. So we think of ourselves as a research organization that makes sure that everything we create in research will have a pathway to being impactful in the society and creating value as a product that IBM will take to the market. For my organization here, I'm just excited that I get to work with young, enthusiastic Africans.
Amen to that, yeah.
And they're building global products and also finding local applications for the products that they're building. That's what drives me.
And that's very exciting because in an earlier podcast, we talked to one of our top researchers, one of the professors, and he was talking about building an army of researchers. You know, given that the continent is very young, you know, we're talking about human capital that we can maximize on. So exciting to hear that you're working closer, more and more with young people.
Absolutely.
I wanted to talk about artificial intelligence, but before we do that,
yes,
it's very interesting to me that IBM is actually a research institution, just as you've said earlier. What it's known for is computers. And I don't know, how did it go from, you know, hardware to actually the research side of things? Or has it always just been research and then kind of straddled on the hardware, developing machines and equipment?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So IBM Research has actually been in existence for 78 years. The organization.
It's longer than most African countries have been independent.
Crazy, right?
Yeah.
The business has been in existence for 113 years. And part of why I like that existence in time is that it tells you that we did not start in making computers.
Yeah.
We're an organization that really reinvents itself. And one of the core statements I absolutely love about the organization is the way we think about ourselves as being essential. And so it's asking, what is the need today in terms of how we help enterprises to do their best work? And so we've done many, many things in the past, and I'm not going to go through our entire history.
Yeah.
But when it comes to not just computers, but computing, we've been fundamental to how computing has come into place, starting with relational databases, a bunch of many different inventions that have really changed computing over the course of history. So when I think about hardware, personal computers or ThinkPads, which are what most from a consumer space people think about, it was just one of the things that's what was needed at that point. And we've since divested that business. We have a big business in mainframes, and this is where we're helping in the processing of the world's most important data sets to make sure, you know, for banks, they're able to run things, you know, real time, detect fraud real time, make sure that your transactions are reliable, there's nothing goes down. So we essentially help businesses with everything that they need in there to run their enterprise, from storage to software to security, and of course now to AI and hybrid cloud, and in the very near future, or you know, as we continue, to quantum. So whatever you need for computing, that's where we are in the enterprise.
I'm going to stop you right there before you start going into the PR side of IBM. So what excites you most about how artificial intelligence is transforming Africa's economic landscape? I know, you know, we've had the conversations about how AI can power industry, but we're very concerned about how Africa is lagging behind. So for you, if you can just speak to this.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right. Today, it's very nascent, okay? And so the excitement is more about the potential for what AI can do to our economies. It's about the fact that we have a number of ingredients that are incredibly important. We have a youthful population that has the potential for really powering and becoming value creators, not just users of AI, all right? Yeah. We have a fair amount of experimentation in the AI space that has happened, which gives us the ability to see that there's potential. So for me, it's cautious excitement, with the understanding that there's a number of ingredients that we need to have in place so that we can get to scale. Yeah. And for me, scale is where you start to have economic impact. So we're at the place of starting to have, you know, quorum, to have the necessary mass of people working on things, of experiments, of use cases that are meaningful for our context. I think we have some room to get to scale that gives us impact.
I mean, if you think about scalability, no one can scale like governments do. And I'm wondering, at what point do we begin to see our governments making use of ChatGPT, you know, especially given what you were saying earlier about, you know, speeding up processes.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be in long queues. We should be
Yeah.
able to do things automatically.
Yeah.
For people who've traveled, again, previous podcasts, we were giggling about how in Dubai, for example, we're seeing less and less human personnel at airports because the machines are just doing almost everything. Yeah. At what point do the African governments, you know, begin to utilize and maximize so that even for them, they're moving at a faster pace for their own citizenry?
So it's a fascinating question about government, right?
Yeah.
Because on one hand, I don't know that government has always been anywhere, not just in Kenya or in the continent. I don't know that government has always been at the forefront of technological advancement. So I don't want to hold our governments to an unrealistic goal. No,
Yeah.
We have to.
Yeah.
But I don't know that the revolution in AI will start with government. I think there's a role for government, but I think it has to start with our startups. It has to start with our enterprises. And then, yes, we hold government accountable because we raise the bar for what is the expectation. That's on one hand. Yeah. Now, we are in an interesting position as a continent where government tends to be the biggest spender. And so maybe there's room there. But in terms of innovation, I keep going back and forth on that. When it comes to the example you've given about Dubai, I think it's a good one. The part that we need to think about is what will AI do for us in the continent? So for many, you know, when you look at where there's a lot of automation and, as you said, fewer and fewer people showing up being in places, it's because they actually have a shortage when it comes to workers. So for them, their AI is very, very targeted to thinking about how will I automate because I have a skills shortage, I have a workers shortage. Many of them, as you know, they're importing a lot of workers. Yes. So their AI is very focused towards that. We need to be very intentional about what are the use cases our AI should be looking at, given that we have an abundance of
personnel.
Yeah. So I think that's where there are things that we can learn, but there are also conversations we need to have internally so that we say, what will this be good for? How will we leverage our demographic dividend to ensure that we really get the benefits of AI?
So demographic dividends, we always avoid our scientists using scientific jargon. A little bit about demographic dividends. Just unpack that for us.
Yeah. So the way I think about it is that while populations across the world are shrinking, youthful populations, many countries, if you think about China, the US, they're actually getting, you know, when you look at the pyramid for population, their biggest populations are actually in the
top.
At the top with the older guys. Yeah. You know, fewer number of people getting fewer children per whatever. So that's not the case in the continent. We have the most youthful population. I think the median age right now is about 19.5, and majority of our population is under the age of 30. So huge population, and the idea with it is that it can be really good for you because now you have a youthful population that can work. And that's the demographic dividend. They can create things that will grow your economy.
Yeah. So
to
influence the economic transformation here. In terms of the sectors, I know you've quickly run away from the Dubai case by talking to something that's really true about them not having the human capital. On the continent, you know, we know in terms of diseases, you know, we're affected thoroughly. You know, I think we are faced by infectious and, I mean, non-communicable, communicable diseases, cancers beginning to increase. And I wonder if digital health is an area or a sector that AI government can use, and it could be both private, public institutions that can maximize on AI. So
absolutely.
A bit on that.
Absolutely. I think we have lots of use cases in the healthcare space, and here's how I think about it so that, you know, our listeners can also sort of find their own use cases using how I think about it. One is spaces where you have a lot of data, where we need to be able to derive some insights to help us to make very personalized, very, you know, make evidence-based decisions. I think that's great room for AI to come in place. When it comes to generative AI, think about all the different molecules that need to be discovered in a much faster way, right? Yeah. So this is a space that AI can also learn and make recommendations for molecules that may have a specific biological activity, and then this can go to private sector for them to test. That process of synthesizing to testing, I personally know takes a very long time. So AI can sort of speed that up. Same thing with things in climate. We know that the continent is the most disproportionately impacted by climate change, even though we're the least contributors to the emissions, right? So again, how do we use AI to start to help us to understand how weather is changing, to help us to be able to provide very targeted insights about the impact and risk for flooding, for wildfires, all of these impacts of climate change. I think that's the realm of AI.
So you've given us an overview of what AI can do for us, and I'm wondering, within the continent, with all this youthful population, do you feel that there's inclusivity in terms of even providing them with the tools to be using those AI? You know, I know mobile penetration, for example, in Kenya is quite high at 70%, but sometimes it's not just about the mobile, it's also about a laptop, it's about good internet. And then the other thing is, are our regulatory policies in place to be able to protect even younger people? You know, I have a 10-year-old and I can imagine them beginning to play around with AI tools. But are they protected? Should I be worried? You know, if I'm a parent, if I'm a government official and beginning to roll this out on the continent?
Wow, that's a question that requires a really long answer. But you know, here's a couple of thoughts I have on it. In terms of, are we able to leverage? I think there are many opportunities. There's much more that we can do. That's the short answer. So let me give shed some light into that. The goal for us as a continent, as a country, should not just be how we're going to use AI. I think it's how we're going to leverage AI to create value, right? If I just give you one of the numbers from a JP Morgan research study, is that the impact on GDP for generative AI, I think within the next 10 years, is going to be an increase of $7 to $10 trillion. So when I think about what we need to do with our young people, is to ask what share of that are they going to participate in capturing or creating value for, right? And value doesn't mean you have to be a research scientist and you work for OpenAI, and so you're creating, you know, the next foundation model. It spans from that to people who are going to use AI to make their business work better. So for me, there's a big span, and we need to think about how we get masses into how do I, whether it's ChatGPT or other tools, how do I use that to create value? That's for me the big part about how we get more people to play. When it comes to regulation, again, for technology that's changing so fast, I think regulation across the world is lagging and is trying to catch up. Now, we do have to be careful in how we think about regulation, right? Because it's difficult when you try to regulate something you don't understand fully. Okay? So the sort of guidelines we think about when it comes to regulating tech, I think one is making sure that we're having lots of conversations among all the different stakeholders, so that one, we build an understanding. What are the capabilities of foundation models or generative AI? What are the things this technology can do well? What are the things it can't, right? And then after that, we start to say, what is a risk-based approach to how we regulate, so that we're not regulating the technology, we're regulating use cases, potential for harm and impact. Okay? And those conversations you can only have once people have a fair understanding of the technology. And then starting to put some sandboxes so people can experiment, so that when you experiment, we can have a conversation about it. And if you ask me, it's also kind of the role where people like you and a podcast like this comes into play, right? We have to have more and more people just raising awareness about what are the issues, what are the things we should be worried about. And that element of communicating science and technology to the public is what creates a public discourse. So should you be worried about your 10-year-old? I would say it's going to be a tool. So like any other tool, like TV, there are there are things we have to put, there are guardrails we have to put. Right. And in the same way that we're having the public discourse, we also have to start to understand, what is my child using it for? How does it help them? What are the risks? How do I put in some guardrails so that there's some responsibility in the use?
I mean, there's been some very interesting conversations moving slightly away from AI into social media, you know, and the use of social media by young ones, teenagers. And recently I discovered something so fascinating, that mobile companies actually do tell parents, when you buy a mobile phone for a young person, social media use, mobile phone use is at 13 years and above, which surprised me because I'm sure there are 5-year-olds on mobile phones. But there have been arguments of parents, certainly in the US, in the UK, I don't know about on the continent, but I'm sure they are having online conversations where there are parents who argue for them, they advocate for the use of mobile phones because for them, they've seen their kids researching on, you know, ideas. We're going to cook, mommy, you know, what's the recipe? Quick. My daughter's very funny when she's doing homework. Like, whenever she asks me a question and I don't have an answer because parents don't have all the answers, she will say, let's Google it, you know, and it's fascinating. So that's interesting about, you know, the sandbox. Yeah. I really love that sandbox, and it would be nice to see maybe the creation of little pockets where people can be allowed to venture, even across age groups, you know.
And just allow, and helping all of us to realize that technology is not, or even social media is not bad as a whole. I think it's that idea of, you look at risks, you try to understand what is it being used for, even by children. What is it being used for? How long? It's all of those elements that come into play for one to make a decision about how they need to regulate it.
The key word was guardrail that I heard you say. So that one I really subscribe to. When you were researching for this podcast and, you know, and your name came up and we're very excited, we also were interested to find out from you which two African scientists inspire you in the area of AI and why?
Wow. Gosh, can I answer that question differently?
Yes, you can.
In terms of the groups of people that inspire me, because I feel like
inclusivity.
That list is too long. Yeah. So I'm really inspired by the founders of deep learning in Durban. And this is because...
Where they're based?
Mostly in SA, but now it's in South Africa, but it's become a movement across the continent. Okay. And the idea for this movement is that we want to increase representation of scientists, engineers in AI. And they started, when I would say 2017 or so. Now they have an annual conference that has thousands and thousands of Africans in AI. Yeah. For me, it's so inspiring to see. Focus on, you know, African relevant AI problems. It's become arguably one of the biggest gatherings of African AI experts. So for me, they just inspire me, and I can't imagine where it's gonna go. Yeah. So that's one category. And then the other category for me is our AI researchers who are just deep, like working and representing us in the global space. So they're the ones who are creating AI research out of Africa for the world. They're showing up in top AI conferences as keynotes, presenting top papers. Their papers are being, nominated for best paper. And of course, some of them work for my team. Yeah. But in a number of the multinationals as well. So those are the two big categories for me. Inspiring. So I can give you some names, but those are the categories. So of course, Mukosi will come in mind. Dr. Celia Sintas, we have Aisha Walcott here, we have Sekou Remy, Gilmore, we have John Wamburu, we have lots and lots of list of researchers who are focused on AI and at the cutting edge, not just applications. Because I think sometimes it's easy for us to be relegated to just taking already discovered AI concepts and then we apply them. These people are creating. Yeah. So they inspire me.
Yeah, you know, when you talk about the deep learning in Durban, I was interested to find out where exactly are you meeting, especially given the continent's issues with visas and movements. And
yeah, this year I think the conference is coming up, I think in September. It's going to be in Senegal.
Okay.
They've held it in Kenya, I want to say about just before COVID. So they go around different countries in the continent, yes.
Yeah.
Of course, visa issues, but well, we have to make it work.
Is our visa issues on the continent an AI intervention? Do they require AI intervention? Is that something that some of these AI experts can help us with a little bit with the governments?
I like to say technology is a tool to help to assist you in working. Policies have to be in the right spot as well.
Yeah.
So there are things that technology can simplify, okay? If it's about how you process things so that, they're much faster, yes, absolutely. But there's also just the room for, here is a policy and here's what our aspiration as a country. So if we say we're going to issue a document in 24 hours, there's also an enforcement part. There's making sure we have the right staffing, all of that fun stuff.
That's true.
So I like to say technology is not the answer to every problem, but it will help you get to the answer.
I like your response.
In most cases.
I like your response. So what 3 steps do you think that the continent, needs to take to shape the use and design of AI? What would be your topmost priorities?
Yeah. I think first and foremost, we need to be very clear about what our goal and aspiration is in terms of what it will do best in our context. And I think we've talked a little bit about that already. The second one, I think, is in being very intent that our youthful population have to be value creators with AI, not just users. And then once we do that, then we can talk about how we regulate. Yeah, those would be
your topmost.
Yeah.
And then lastly, as we're wrapping up, we have a recurring segment on the podcast where we love to ask our guests what excites you, and what scares you, especially when you look at the world right now, over and beyond being in Kenya, being on the continent.
I think I want to focus it on Kenya, actually, just because I think in the last couple of weeks, I think as a country, we've seen the potential for what technology can do.
Yes, I think our president has also seen this.
And from the perspective of driving change, helping people to learn things quickly. I think there was a ChatGPT for the finance bill.
Yeah, wow.
To organize people.
Yeah.
And the potential that our youth have in terms of creating solutions on the go. For me, I think that it's exciting from the perspective of that energy that we can really harness to drive meaningful change, not just from a political space. Mm-hmm. I think for me, that's what excites me. It just said there's an innovation capability that our people have. Given problems to address, we can do a bunch of good things with technology. So that really excites me. Yeah. And gives me, shows me that there's a lot of potential that's untapped. What scares me a little bit is actually the same thing.
Yeah.
In that
it can be used for evil. Not for
yes, and there was a fair amount of misinformation, disinformation, etc., etc. Yeah. So there's also room for us to say, how do you get the best out of technology? I like to think about it as a knife is a tool in the hands of a chef.
What
fantastic
a good
tool
analogy.
That you can make beautiful things.
Dishes
you can
with,
cut,
yeah.
all of that cool stuff. They can make fantastic cuttings out of a carrot you'd never imagine, right? Yeah. But a knife can also be incredibly dangerous if it's in the hand of someone who wants to kill. Yeah. So it's how do we make sure that we're providing a knife to people who are going to be a chef to create beautiful, amazing things for our country.
What an amazing analogy. And I mean, I think like all things, there is good and bad side. There's yin and yang. These always coexist. I guess it's always quieting the bad and then amplifying the good. As we summarize and as we close, what is your Hall of Fame moment or your parting shot, call to action?
This is our moment as the continent to really leverage one of the most transformative technologies of our time to address problems and challenges that are meaningful to us. There's a huge opportunity. I hope that we're going to be value creators, not just users.
Thank you so much, Dr. Charity Wayua. It's been exciting hosting you.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. I did.
So we're looking forward to exciting things from IBM, from you.
Absolutely.
And from the teams and also the people at Deep Learning in Dubai and a lot of the meeting conferences that you've referenced from.
Lots coming up.
Yeah.
I'm excited too.
Excited. Maybe we'll have you for part 2 of this podcast.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Connecting the Dots podcast, created by me, Juliette. This episode was brought to life by Mumbua and Kevin at Silent Global in Nairobi, Kenya. If you enjoyed this episode, don't just keep it to yourself. Share it, tag us, and let's keep the conversations going. Do let us know if there's any science topic that you'd want to hear about. And then join me on the next episode as I interview the next amazing African scientist here on Connecting the Dots podcast. Thank you.